Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're getting into something really fundamental. We're wrestling with this massive contradiction that sits right at the heart of American national security. We're talking about the Central Intelligence Agency, an organization that, on paper was created to provide the essential unbiased truth to our leaders.
Right. Truth to power. That's the whole idea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But its history is just... It's defined by the opposite. It's deception, it's political pressure, and a string of operational catastrophes that just go on for decades.
That paradox is really the engine for this whole deep dive. And we should be clear, we are leaning entirely on the incredible exhaustive research in the book Legacy of Ashes, The History of the CIA.
And this isn't just another history book.
Oh, not at all. This is a synthesis of over 50,000 declassified documents, 50,000, plus 2,000 oral histories, 300 interviews. The entire point of the source material is to peel back that veil of secrecy and show you what U.S. leaders really said, really wanted, and really did.
So our mission today is to really distill the most critical failures of the CIA, organizationally and operationally. We're going to trace these patterns of, internal fighting, bad management, and maybe most importantly, political compromise.
All the way from its chaotic birth in 1945 straight through the Iraq War in 2007.
Right. And the big question is, how did the U.S. just keep finding itself without the intelligence it needed? How did we end up with what the book calls a legacy of ashes and a state of complete disarray?
And, to even find the starting point, you have to go back before the CIA was even officially created. The source reminds us that the foundational failure, the original sin, really, happened years earlier.
Pearl Harbor.
The intelligence community, or what passed for one, had actually broken the Japanese codes. They had the pieces. But the intelligence was considered too secret to share.
That's just the perfect summary of the problem, isn't it? The information was divided, hoarded, and scattered.
Exactly. You had the Army with one piece, the Navy with another, and nobody was putting it all together. No one had that big picture.
So the nation was blindsided, not because the information wasn't there, but because hoarding it was just the default setting. And that precedent, that institutional inability to trust a central process, it just haunts the agency from the second it's conceived.
Precisely. That failure is what led to the calls for a new central organization, but the creation process itself was, deeply flawed from day one.
Okay, so let's start there. At the end of the war, you have the OSS, the Wartime Intelligence Group. Its head, General William Donovan, he proposes a peacetime Central Intelligence Service.
But President Truman, he did not trust this idea at all. He had this deep, almost visceral distrust of what he called Gestapo tactics on American soil.
He was worried about a secret police.
Deeply worried. And that distrust was ruthlessly fed by his rivals, especially J. Edgar Hoover at the FBI, who, wanted that global intelligence franchise for himself.
Right.
And Truman's suspicion was really solidified by this top-secret report from a Colonel Park, which is later described as a political murder weapon. Just a brutal takedown aimed squarely at Donovan and the OSS.
Let's unpack that report, because the charges in it they're specific, and frankly, they're kind of astonishing. This wasn't just about organizational charts.
No, this highlighted just absurd levels of incompetence. For instance, it stated that General Donovan himself lost a critical briefcase to the Nazis.
How he lost a briefcase to the Nazis.
It was, and I quote, turned over to the Gestapo by a Romanian dancer.
You can't be serious.
I am. I mean, if your wartime intelligence chief is losing secrets because of high society dancers, you've got a fundamental problem.
And it went deeper than just, bad operational security.
Oh, much deeper. The report charged that the hiring was all based on an old boy network. It was all Wall Street social register types. The agency was seen as an exclusive club, not a professional intelligence service.
And they had these incredible operational blunders, too.
Yeah, the report mentioned mistakenly dropping commandos into neutral Sweden. And, even more tragically, blowing up their own guards while they were protecting a captured German ammunition dump in France. The report's conclusion was just scathing. It warned against using the almost hopeless compromise of OSS personnel after the war because everyone knew their weaknesses.
So this report, and Truman's own politics, it effectively dismantled Donovan's dream. And what came next? This interim step, the Central Intelligence Group, the CIG, it started as a complete mess, almost a comedy.
It was absolutely farcical. When the first director of Central Intelligence, Sidney Sowers, was brought to Truman, the president gave him this whole theatrical send-off.
Right. He presented him with a black cloak, black hat and wooden dagger.
A wooden dagger. And he knights him chief of the Cloak and Dagger group of snoopers and director of centralized snooping.
Which just shows you how seriously Truman was taking it at the time.
He saw it as this absurd political necessity he had to deal with. And Sowers, who was a serious guy, he was deeply reluctant. His immediate response was just, I want to go home.
He didn't even want the job.
No. And the organization he inherited was totally blind when it came to the new enemy, the Soviet Union. Richard Helms, who would later run the CIA, admitted that in those early Cold War days, they knew nothing about what the Soviets were planning.
They were building a spy service from scratch.
Absolute scratch. He was blunt about it. He said if they found a telephone book or a map of an airfield, that was pretty hot stuff.
A telephone book. Just think about that. The Iron Curtain's falling, and the Central Intelligence Group for the United States is desperately searching for basic city maps.
That vacuum, that total lack of strategic intelligence, it created the perfect conditions for what came next, operational overreach.
And that strategic vacuum, it just demanded action. Which is how we get to the institutionalization of covert warfare, which, fundamentally changed the DNA of the agency before it even really got on its feet.
And the driving force for this was George Kennan, the intellectual author of the containment strategy. He was the one pushing for this aggressive political warfare.
But it's fascinating that Kennan himself, who pushed for this whole thing under NSE Directive 102, later called it the greatest mistake I ever made.
He understood, in retrospect, that covert operations manipulating foreign politics were just fundamentally corrosive to American values.
And some people saw the danger right away. The DCI at the time, Hillencutter, he was aghast at the whole concept of peacetime covert action.
But the fear of communism was just overwhelming. The demand to do something was way stronger than any warnings about ethical compromise.
So they created this special vehicle to do it, designed to operate completely outside normal government rules.
Frank Wisner's Office of Policy Coordination, the OPC, an organization so secret that, and this is a quote, the existence of the organization itself was also secret.
And Wisner, he basically became the financial warlord of the early Cold War. He built a force 5 times larger than the entire wartime OSS.
Right. Often by poaching people, offering them higher salaries. He controlled a military stockpile worth $250 million. And he was given a blank check, a budget of as many millions as I could spend.
And this leads us to the first really major ethical compromise in terms of funding. The CIA didn't just use its own budget.
No, it was siphoning millions directly from the Marshall Plan.
The Marshall Plan. The program to rebuild Europe.
The very same. This money, which was supposed to be for economic relief, was used to finance false fronts, recruit foreign agents, and secretly support anti-communist political groups all over Europe.
Which was only possible because of this incredibly broad interpretation of the CIA Act of 1949.
Exactly. Congress gave them the widest conceivable powers, only stopping them from being a secret police inside the U.S. But the real loophole, the fatal one, was procedural.
The secret budget.
The secret budget. The approval of the CIA's budget by this tiny select subcommittee in Congress that was seen as legal authorization for all secret operations. It didn't matter what they were, how big they were, or what the ethical cost was.
And you can see exactly where that leads. When Richard Nixon summed it all up years later, he just said, if it's secret, it's legal.
And that philosophy, it created a culture where accountability was just a procedural thing, not an ethical one. That laid the groundwork for all the operational disasters that followed. They were now a massive operation built for aggression, but totally unprepared for the realities of espionage.
And that shift from, organizational chaos to immediate operational catastrophe, it happened almost instantly once the OPC was fully funded.
The ambition was huge, but the execution was amateurish and deadly, especially when they started going up against the Soviets.
The human cost is it's staggering. The CIA, full of these untrained officers, just started running operations behind the Iron Curtain. They were doomed from the start.
Take the Ukrainian agents. The first successful penetration of the Soviet Union was in September 1949. They dropped these Ukrainian resistance agents near Lvov. Internally, it was hailed as a huge success.
But the reality was very different.
Very different. The official CIA history, declassified much later, offers this terse, chilling summary. The Soviets quickly eliminated the agents.
And this wasn't a one-off. This was the pattern.
It was the pattern. They sent dozens more Ukrainian agents, and almost every single one was captured, a lot of them within hours of landing. And this is where Soviet counterintelligence showed just how ruthless it could be.
They didn't just kill them?
No. They used them. They used the prisoners to feed back sophisticated disinformation. They'd send messages saying, all's well, send more guns, more money, more men, which just confirmed the CIA's false sense of success. Then they'd execute the agents, and the agency just kept falling for it, launching what they would later just call abortive missions.
We really need to pause on the moral weight of that. The source material makes it clear that the CIA leadership knew, or at least they strongly suspected, that these agents were being turned or killed.
But they kept sending them anyway. Headquarters demanded action, and they didn't want to admit failure.
And that internal deception really hit its peak during the Korean War.
Yeah. Classified CIA histories written after the fact concluded that these paramilitary operations were not only ineffective, but probably morally reprehensible in the number of lives lost.
Thousands of agents. Just go on.
Thousands of Korean and Chinese agents were dropped and never returned, and the leadership just covered it up. Alan Dulles told Congress the CIA was controlling this huge internal resistance in North Korea.
Run in reality.
In reality, a whistleblower later said the agency had no such assets and was, in fact, being duped by the enemy. They were getting played.
That failure to get any real human intelligence was also just incredibly wasteful.
Oh, massively. Look at Western Enterprises, the CIA front in Taiwan that was supposed to subvert Mao's China. It was deemed an incredible waste of money. A CIA officer who reviewed it said the whole thing was built on a bill of goods sold by Chinese nationalists who were promising this huge resistance force that didn't exist.
There's that anecdote that's just so telling. The officer reviewing it literally said the operation was no more clandestine than the Chinese whorehouses his colleagues were frequenting.
It paints a picture, doesn't it? An agency flush with cash, but with absolutely zero operational discipline.
One of the later DCIs, Biddle Smith, he really lamented this. He said, secret operations are a job for the professional and not for the amateur.
And he desperately wanted to scale back to limit them to what they could actually do well, which was analysis. But the covert side, led by Wisner, was just an unstoppable machine. The political momentum for action was just too great.
So by the mid-50s, that momentum shifts from these, feudal missions into the Soviet bloc to something much more politically explosive, overthrowing governments.
And the template for the modern CIA coup was set with Operation Ajax in Iran, 1953, targeting Prime Minister Mossadegh.
This was run by Kermit Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt's grandson. And the source material just reveals the sheer chaos of it. The plan centered on hiring street mobs.
And when the Shah initially fled and it looked like it was failing, Wisner sent a frantic message to Tehran to call it off, to cease the operation.
Roosevelt on the ground, he just ignored it.
Completely ignored headquarters. This is a critical pattern you see over and over. Agents on the ground, driven by ego and mission creep, just pushing past their orders. They work to create anarchy, hiring more mobs, paying them in cash out of bags on the street.
And it worked. They got rid of Mossadegh. But the source notes that the operation was basically a black comedy in its execution. The lesson the agency took, though, wasn't this was messy and wrong. It was this worked.
And they immediately applied that success to Guatemala a year later. Operation Success, aimed at President Arbenz. And this whole operation was compromised almost immediately in a scene straight out of a bad spy movie.
It really was. A CIA officer, the liaison to the coup leader, left secret cables and top-secret documents in a Guatemala City hotel room.
The security breach was so catastrophic that the poor guy was immediately pulled and told to go take a job as a fire watcher in the Pacific Northwest, the absolute opposite of spy work.
But the operation continued, and the orders started to escalate way beyond just regime change.
Yeah, one CIA officer, a Colonel Haney, issued unauthorized orders to arm peasants and told them to go kill police. This was incitement to civil violence.
And Wisner, who was often pretty reckless himself, was actually alarmed by this.
He was. He cabled back, saying, this amounts to incitement civil war, and warned it would discredit the whole thing.
The pressure was coming from everywhere. The U.S. ambassador, John Purifoy, commandeered the secure line and wrote directly to Alan Dulles, bomb, repeat, bomb.
Bomb, repeat, bomb.
And at the same time, the CIA stations was telling a coup leader that Arbenz and all the communists will be executed. This wasn't covert action anymore. This was outsourced murder. And it showed just how quickly those ethical lines could be erased.
So when Eisenhower comes in, he solidifies the CIA's power, partly because the new DCI, Alan Dulles, had this deep connection to him. And Dulles, he was all in on covert action.
To the point where his disdain for objective intelligence analysis caused, according to the source, untold damage to the agency's actual core mission. And his tenure starts with this massive intelligence failure that just terrified Eisenhower. Dulles becomes DCI 1 week before Stalin dies in March 1953.
And Eisenhower was furious, because after years of yapping about what would happen when Stalin dies, the U.S. government had no plan, no idea what was coming next.
This intelligence blindness, it just fueled Eisenhower's anxiety. Look at the ICBM estimates. The CIA guessed the Soviets wouldn't launch an ICBM before 1969.
An estimate that was off by a dozen years. When Sputnik went up in '57, the White House was caught completely flat-footed. Eisenhower feared a nuclear Pearl Harbor, a sneak attack, and the CIA couldn't calm those fears. They admitted they could give no prior warning.
And that fear, that gap, it drove this reevaluation of American ethics. It's what gave real teeth to the Doolittle Report in 1954, which has one of the most chilling passages in U.S. intelligence history.
It's a passage that really deserves some reflection. It essentially codified amorality as official policy. It said, "Hitherto acceptable norms of human conduct do not apply. If the United States is to survive, long-standing American concepts of fair play must be reconsidered."
So we're talking about an official government report that says we have to abandon fair play to survive. It explicitly urged them to subvert, sabotage, and destroy our enemies. This wasn't just operational necessity. This was institutional moral compromise driven by fear.
And the inability of human spies to get anything out of the Soviet Union meant the focus had to shift. The Killing Report marked the triumph of technology and the eclipse of old-fashioned espionage.
The U-2 skyplane.
Exactly. It urged Eisenhower to build the U-2 and eventually satellites, a technology Dulles and Wisner had actually ignored just a couple of years earlier.
So the system is adapting to failure. Dick Bissell, who ran the U-2 program, became more and more contemptuous of traditional spying. He saw it as slow and unreliable.
He saw the U-2 as this ultimate aggressive tool, information superiority from 70,000 feet. He believed it would just sap Soviet pride because Moscow couldn't do a goddamn thing to prevent you from seeing all their secrets.
But technology isn't enough. You need to manage perception. And this is where Allen Dulles was a master. He built this massive media machine.
Oh, his reach was extraordinary. The source confirms he could pick up the phone and literally edit a breaking story or get a correspondent pulled from a foreign bureau. His PR machine included over 50 news organizations, pledges of support from Henry Luce at Time, executives at CBS News. It let him plant stories and create cover for whatever he wanted to do.
And this political warfare expanded everywhere. In Japan, the CIA funneled support to the Liberal Democratic Party to influence their foreign policy.
And this leads to another one of those startling ethical compromises. The agency started actively recruiting convicted war criminals. Okunori Kaya, who was Japan's finance minister during the war, he gets paroled, pardoned, and then becomes a recruited CIA agent.
A convicted war criminal working for the CIA. And this relationship went right to the top.
It did. Kaya met secretly with Allen Dulles in 1959. Dulles saw him as a crucial asset, which just underscores his willingness to compromise any moral standard for a perceived strategic gain.
And that willingness to lie was tested spectacularly in 1960. Eisenhower was constantly worried that his reputation for honesty would be squandered if a U-2 went down.
And of course it did. When Gary Powers was shot down, the White House and the State Department just unleashed a week of lies. First it was a weather plane, then a spy plane, but a rogue one. The final definitive lie was there was no authorization for such a flight.
But Khrushchev had the pilot and the wreckage. The source says Eisenhower was absolutely shattered. He was forced to admit his government lied, and it destroyed his reputation right at the end of his term. The agency's need for cover compromised the President of the United States.
And the Eisenhower era ends with the rise of Castro and the beginning of explicit assassination plots. A huge escalation.
For the Bay of Pigs, Dulles and Bissell proposed this sleight of hand, training 500 exiles at a camp in Guatemala.
A camp that famously had its own airport and, tellingly, its own brothel. But the real problem wasn't logistics, it was security. Castro's spies were all over the chatty Cuban exiles. The whole thing was probably compromised from the start.
And the plotting just descended into pure gangsterism.
It did. Bissell put out a mafia contract against Fidel Castro and got Dulles' approval. The logic was cold. Kill Castro before the invasion, make the military part just a formality.
The CIA contracting its dirtiest work to the American mafia, it's just profound.
And when Robert Kennedy found out later, he was mad as hell. But the source is clear. He wasn't mad about the assassination plot itself. He was mad about the insane risk of involving organized crime.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Eisenhower personally ordered the killing of Patrice Lumumba in the Congo.
The order came straight from the Oval Office, and the CIA executed it indirectly. They gave $250,000 in weapons to Joseph Mobutu, who captured Lumumba and had him executed by a Belgian officer.
And the long-term blowback was just catastrophic.
Absolutely. Mobutu ruled for 3 decades as one of the world's most brutal and corrupt dictators. But because he was anti-communist, he had the CIA's unwavering support. The agency was built for action, not truth, by the time Eisenhower left office.
So when Kennedy takes office, the agency's hubris and deceit lead to this immediate, painful lesson: the Bay of Pigs. This is where the CIA's pride just violently collides with reality.
Dick Bissell, who ran it, was desperate to please Kennedy, who wanted a quiet coup, not a big invasion. So, to appease the White House, Bissell cut the American air support in half.
He compromised the military plan for political optics, a fatal mistake.
And then came the lies. Bissell and his deputy, Tracy Barnes, played Ambassador Adlai Stevenson for a fool. They forced him to sell the cover story to the UN that the attack was from a lone Cuban defector.
And Stevenson, this respected diplomat, finds out the next day he's been lied to. Publicly humiliated, it sent this damaging message that the CIA would even deceive its own government allies.
And the blowback wasn't just at the UN. Hours before the invasion, the Secretary of State had to send a formal apology to Singapore's Prime Minister.
Why?
Singapore's police had raided a CIA safe house and discovered a cabinet minister on the CIA payroll. The station chief, facing total exposure, immediately offered a $3.3 million bribe to hush it up.
So you have a military failure in the Caribbean and international bribery scandal in Southeast Asia happening at the same time.
It showed the depth of the rot. And yet, when Allen Dulles retired later that year, he installed that infamous motto at the new headquarters: "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free."
The irony is just perfect, a perfect summary of the agency's self-delusion.
But then, within a year, the world faces the Cuban Missile Crisis. And here we see this rare moment where real intelligence actually manages to cut through all the noise.
John McConey, the new DCI, was the crucial dissenting voice. The official CIA experts were unanimously and adamantly convinced that Khrushchev would never put offensive missiles in Cuba.
They thought it was beyond the realm of possibility. But McConey's logic was just simple and practical. If I were Khrushchev, I'd put offensive missiles in Cuba. He was challenging decades of bias from the Soviet analysts.
And the critical intelligence? It didn't come from some high-level source.
No, it came from the lowest rung of the ladder, a Cuban road watcher, an agent at the very bottom, who reported seeing canvas-covered cargo the size of telephone poles.
But the agency's internal bias was so strong, they fought the overflight approval for 10 days.
It was McConey who forced the issue. It showed that the only thing that matters is the ground truth, no matter who reports it. The system almost failed again because the experts couldn't handle intelligence that challenged their assumptions.
And that brings us to Vietnam, the ultimate protracted test of the CIA's integrity, and a devastating example of politically driven intelligence.
In 1963, the overthrow of South Vietnamese President Diem was approved. Ambassador Lodge ordered the CIA to conceal the American role. The assassination was a cold-blooded affair, signaled by a general raising 2 fingers.
And just like the Bay of Pigs, the cover-up was immediate. Lodge later demanded the CIA find Diem, and the agency cabled back that his death was a suicide committed en route.
They fed the White House a lie to manage the politics, even though everyone knew it was murder.
After Kennedy's assassination, Lyndon Johnson's paranoia became intense. The source says he was thinking, if they had shot our president, who would they shoot next? He demanded intelligence that validated his political course in Vietnam.
And this is where DCI Richard Helms got caught. His analysts were all pessimistic about the war, but the clandestine service was gung-ho. Helms felt like he was a circus rider standing astride 2 horses.
And political necessity won out.
Repeatedly. To please LBJ, who was always demanding good news, Helms literally rewrote intelligence estimates. He'd alter conclusions to say, "We believe that communist progress has been blunted, even when all the analysis said the opposite."
The definition of fixing the facts around the policy.
But he did have one small act of integrity. He sent LBJ one brutally honest CIA study called Implications of an Unfavorable Outcome in Vietnam. It said U.S. military power was ill-suited to cope with guerrilla warfare.
But he sent it secretly.
He did. He noted the paper was not given to any other official because he knew the truth was explosive. The fact that the truth had to be delivered in a secret memo shows how profound the institutional lie had become.
And while the agency was lying to the White House about Vietnam, it was being crippled internally by this deep, corrosive paranoia.
Jim Angleton, chief of counterintelligence. He was a figure straight out of a spy novel, obsessed with the Soviet master plot. He was convinced every defector was fake and that a high-level mole was inside the CIA.
And his reign of error led directly to the Nosenko case, a really dark chapter.
Yuri Nosenko, a high-value KGB defector, was immediately assumed to be a fraud by Angleton. So he was held for 3 years in a windowless CIA prison cell, subjected to extreme psychological intimidation.
The source mentions an audio tape where a CIA officer is just screaming, "That's bullshit," at him. This wasn't interrogation, it was torture, driven by Angleton's certainty.
And that certainty paralyzed Russian operations for a decade. He was always looking for this phantom traitor.
But Nosenko was legitimate.
Completely. He was later credited with identifying 300 Soviet agents and 52 hidden microphones in the Moscow embassy. Angleton's paranoia was more destructive than any mole could have been. The Russian division was essentially non-functional for years because of it.
So after Watergate, this crisis of trust in government finally forces the CIA into the spotlight.
Right, and the DCI, Bill Colby, he realized the agency couldn't survive if all its secrets came out piecemeal. So he made the controversial decision to reveal a horror book of secrets to Congress.
And what a book it was.
Assassination plots, mind control experiments, drug tests on unwitting guinea pigs, massive domestic surveillance against Americans. Colby knew it was the mortal sin of exposure, but he felt he had to come clean to save the institution.
And the investigations that followed, the Church and Pike committees, they revealed just how lawless it had been.
Richard Helms, the DCI from the Vietnam era, testified under oath that the CIA had nothing to do with overthrowing Allende in Chile. He was later charged with a misdemeanor for not telling the whole truth.
Which was a weak charge. But the fact that a DCI was indicted for perjury to Congress?
Yeah.
That's a huge deal.
It was public recognition that the leadership had systematically lied. George H.W. Bush was brought in to stabilize things, and he said the investigations caused long-lasting damage. The trust was gone. The CIA was, in his words, a graveyard for politics.
But despite that reckoning, the underlying problems, the blind spots, the drift toward illegal covert action, they just persisted.
Take Jimmy Carter. He ran for office calling the CIA a national disgrace. But once he was in power, he signed almost as many covert action orders as Nixon and Ford.
He just did it in the name of human rights.
Exactly. The mechanism was the same, just a different justification. But the agency was still dangerously blind. In 1979, they did not understand who Khomeini was in Iran.
The DCI at the time, Stansfield Turner, admitted it. He said, "We were just plain asleep."
A massive geopolitical transformation, and it happened completely outside their framework. Then, later that year, the CIA gave the White House next to no warning of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. These two massive failures convinced the next administration that the CIA needed to get aggressive again.
Which leads us directly into the Reagan era and William Casey.
And with Casey as DCI, the tension between intelligence and politics just reached a fever pitch. He was a charming scoundrel from Wall Street, seen as totally unqualified by people like Ford and Bush.
He was a political operative who wanted to get around legal constraints. He famously muttered, "By God, we've got to get rid of the lawyers."
And he showed contempt for Congress from day one. They explicitly banned funding for the Contra War, but Casey just ignored them. When he had to testify, he would mumble and obfuscate and occasionally lie through his teeth. After one hearing, he said, "I hope that will hold the bastards."
And that contempt of Congress culminates in Iran-Contra. Casey embraces this idea of trading arms for hostages in Iran, and he relies on the word of this Iranian middleman, Manouchehr Ghorbanifar.
And this is a textbook case of political desperation overriding professional judgment. Ghorbanifar was so unreliable that the CIA had officially certified him as a consummate liar with a worldwide burn notice.
A burn notice is the highest possible warning, right? It means this person is radioactive, do not use them under any circumstances.
Absolutely. For Casey to use him anyway was an act of deliberate, egregious risk, throwing all professional standards out the window to achieve a policy goal Congress had banned.
And the result was this illegal money pipeline.
The first missile transaction left a surplus of $850,000 in a Swiss bank account. That money, profit from selling arms to Iran, was then funneled by Colonel North to the Contras. Iran became an illegal funding source for an illegal war.
And when the scandal broke, Casey's talking points claimed the agency had enjoyed no scandal and a good many solid successes. Just a total divorce from reality.
And compounding all that was the greatest internal security catastrophe in the agency's history. Between 1985 and 1986, the Soviet division experienced the worst penetration in the agency's history.
The losses were total. Every single one of its agents in place was lost. A dozen spies arrested and executed by Moscow, one by one, and the CIA had no idea why.
And the internal investigation was a joke. Casey just shrugged it off, put 3 people on it. For years, the official line was bad luck or KGB technical skill, not betrayal.
But the truth was betrayal. Aldrich Ames and Harold Nicholson.
They gave Moscow the names of hundreds of officers and operations. This wasn't Angleton's phantom mole. This was real, systematic treason at the highest levels.
And the most shocking part is what happened next.
For 8 years, senior officers knowingly gave 3 presidents, Reagan, Bush, and Clinton, intelligence they knew was being manipulated by Moscow. They hid the fact that their entire Soviet intelligence stream was tainted just to avoid embarrassment.
So they were willingly feeding the White House garbage, knowing it was garbage.
95 of these tainted reports warped American perceptions of the Soviet Union during the critical final years of the Cold War. The irony is crushing. Angleton paralyzed them, looking for a mole that didn't exist. When the real penetration happened, they covered it up for a decade. Institutional self-preservation had completely trumped national security.
So the Cold War ends, and the CIA is just in disarray. It's lost its main focus, and it's been gutted from the inside.
The DCI, Robert Gates, he recognized the threat. He wrote a review called Adjust or Die. But the organizational culture, this rigid old boys network, it just resisted any change.
Gates recalled this one frustrating example. He tried to hire a candidate who was fluent in Azeri, a critical language for the former Soviet republics.
And the candidate was rejected because he didn't write English very well.
Unbelievable.
Gates said he went crazy. He had thousands of people who could write English, but not one who could speak Azeri. The agency just struggled to recruit the children of immigrants and refugees that it needed for modern intelligence.
And that failure to adjust was brought home violently in 1993. A terrorist attack right outside CIA headquarters. 2 people killed. A month later, the first World Trade Center bombing.
And the source notes this chilling connection. The WTC bomber, a blind sheik, had recruited fighters for the CIA-backed Afghan war in the 80s. The blowback from their own covert actions was literally at their doorstep, and they couldn't connect the dots.
And then came the ultimate failure to adjust, the threat from al-Qaeda. In the late 90s, DCI George Tenet repeatedly hesitated to strike Osama bin Laden.
There was one moment an urgent strike request came in, but Tenet rejected it. The intelligence rested on one man's word, and hundreds of people were sleeping in the compound. The agency had gone from gung-ho to go slow.
And that caution had devastating consequences. August 6, 2001, the president's daily brief. Bin Laden determined to strike in U.S.
But the warning was dismissed by many. It was called a very weak piece of reporting based on old intelligence. The signal was there, but the ability to prioritize it was gone.
After 9/11, under immense pressure, Tenet's one big flaw, his all-consuming desire to please his superiors, it became a catastrophic fault line.
And driven by that desire, the agency produced what the book calls the worst body of work in its long history.
The Special National Intelligence Estimate on Iraq WMD, the justification for the invasion.
Jim Pavitt, the chief of the clandestine service, later admitted the humiliating truth. We had less than a handful of reliable Iraqi sources.
Less than a handful.
They were forced to produce a ton of analysis from an ounce of intelligence. They were gambling that WMDs would be found after the invasion to justify what they had written.
And the war began with immediate, fatal failures based on bad CIA tips. The first strike, trying to get Saddam at Dora Farms, missed completely. Another strike killed 18 innocent civilians.
The whole institution was in decline. The Pentagon crushed the CIA's dominance. Veterans started quitting to go work for contractors like Blackwater, adopting this cynical 5-year plan, get in, get out, and get paid. The institution had fractured.
So when you review this entire history, this legacy of ashes, it's not just a few bad incidents. It's these persistent organizational themes. You see the constant danger of politically driven intelligence in Iran, in Vietnam, and then disastrously in Iraq.
You see the repeated incompetence of covert action, the suicide missions, the Bay of Pigs, the blowback in the Congo. The desire to act always outpaced the ability to plan or execute effectively.
And most tragically, you see these profound internal struggles with integrity. The mole hunts that paralyze them, the lack of language skills, and the self-destructive culture that let traitors like Ames operate for years,
Right.
poisoning American foreign policy right at the source.
The core conflict of the CIA has never changed. Its integrity depends entirely on its ability to speak truth to power, no matter the political cost.
But political pressure and this drive to justify its own existence through covert action just repeatedly compromise that objectivity, leaving the country blind to its greatest threats.
The fact that Allen Dulles put that motto, "and ye shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free," at headquarters right before a decade of assassination plots and cover-ups, it's the ultimate contradiction.
So given this repeated history of internal deceit, the Ames cover-up, Iran-Contra, the WMD estimate, and the collapse of any real congressional oversight, the final provocative question is still there.
Since the CIA is, by its very nature, an organization that has to thrive on deception overseas, how can the American people possibly ensure that it maintains the internal integrity needed to prevent the next catastrophic failure, especially when its default setting seems to be lying to protect itself?
A truly heavy thought, and one that forces us to question the whole structure of accountability. Thank you for joining the Deep Dive.